Emilie is the final character being released in Fontaine, and since she's being released in the second half of the very last patch, she might as well be a Natlan character. And based on all the testing I've done, she's designed like one too. So we're gonna go over what I mean by this, talk about whether or not you should get her, and how to make the most out of her if you do. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Emilie is an off-field Dendro DPS. Her skill has a fantastically long 22-second duration with just a 14-second cooldown. This means that virtually no matter what team you're playing her on, her rotations are flexible enough to fit. On top of that, basically her entire kit functions just by using her skill. Her kit is very similar in design to Fischl, where her skill places an off-field turret that does very good damage, more damage than Fischl, and her burst actually functions to refresh the skill, although in Emilie's case, it does a pretty decent amount of AoE damage as well. The kicker is Emilie does a lot more damage when targeting burning opponents. So any team you play her on needs to activate the burning reaction and have a reasonable consistency to it. Emilie makes up part of this reaction, but because she doesn't have any special passives that extend the burning duration all on her own, she still needs to be paired with an off-field pyro character, otherwise the fire will run out, she'll stop getting her passive, and stop doing damage. This makes her team building a little bit restrictive, which can hold her back in a number of teams, which we'll talk about in the team section, but by and large, it's not that bad to fit a pyro character alongside Emilie onto most teams. But just like I expect Natlan characters to get a lot better with the Archon, I expect Emilie to get way better when we have the Archon. This is because right now Bennett is almost always a staple character on teams with Emilie just because of how the team building works, but Bennett doesn't provide any off-field pyro application, which means you have to play Xiangling. And on a bunch of teams you want to play Xiangling and you don't want to play Bennett, such as with Novelette, and Xiangling is just a very awkward character to fit onto these teams. So all in all, assuming the Pyro Archon does have some off-field pyro application, which I definitely expect her to, Emilie will age like fine perfume. Does perfume age well? I think it loses fragrance actually. She'll age well. I think one thing of note is that on many teams, especially mono pyro teams, she's actually a very good replacement to Xiangling. She does more damage in single target while also not requiring nearly as much energy management. And she also kind of functions as a Chevreuse replacement in a bunch of teams. So it's not like Emilie doesn't have any uses right now. It's just, at least from my testing, there are generally better versions of her in most of the teams we have. So that's why I add as in the title, I think Emilie is a skip for most people for now, but that very well might change with the Pyro Archon and with other future characters. Although I think Emilie is a skip, I don't think she's weak, and I don't think she's a bad pull. I don't generally recommend pulling on future potential, but if you are planning to pick up, such as Milani or Keqing, especially for a Keqing, I think that there are very reliable predictions that he will use Emilie on his best teams. And I think in general, Emilie is made for Natlan, while also being not a bad unit for now. There are a couple more positives that I wanted to talk about of her versus Xiangling. Because she doesn't snapshot, she is extremely flexible, both on teams where she uses Bennett and on potentially future teams where she doesn't. A big part of Xiangling's value is that she takes advantage of the Bennett's attack buff for the entire duration of her burst as long as you cast it inside her burst. Emilie, however, can be cast before Bennett's burst, allowing your DPS to have better uptime, or she can be used on a team that doesn't use Bennett. This means that I think, although right now she feels sort of like a side grade, sometimes upgrade, sometimes downgrade, in the future I think she will always be preferred to Xiangling, especially when we finally get a Bennett replacement that will probably work differently from the way Bennett does now. So for that reason, I think that this is the big advantage for Emilie right now and will continue to be an even bigger advantage in the future. Great. The other thing Emilie does that's very important is she greatly reduces the burning damage that your on-field character takes. This allows you to play burning teams without worrying about killing your characters, as otherwise you're very liable to die. So without further ado, let's talk about all the teams I tested her in. Starting off with what was overall the best team, it's Mono Pyro, but you replace Xiangling with Emilie. And obviously my favorite version of Mono Pyro is with Arlecchino. Arlecchino's damage is just out of this world, but whether you're using Arlecchino or Linny or Yoimiya or Hu Tao or Klee, Hu Tao generally wants to vape, but whoever you're using, Emilie fits right in here. This team really feels a lot like a Chevreuse team, especially with Arlecchino, since you have the ability to swap out and refresh your causeway. Kazuha buff, and it performs very similarly to C6 Chevreuse, where you'd replace Chevreuse with Emilie and Fischl with Kazuha. The advantage it does have over Chevreuse, where while dealing maybe slightly less single target, it obviously has Kazuha on the team, so it's a lot better in AoE overall. I really like this team. I definitely wouldn't recommend pulling Emilie just so you can play this team, because you can already play this team with a free character called Xiangling. But if you do happen to go for Emilie and you have Arlecchino, try this out. This is a great team. I really like it. And same goes for Linny. It pretty much functions exactly how you'd expect, with the big advantage over Xiangling is that you can refresh Emilie's skill much more frequently and with much more flexibility, and that can translate to faster clear times overall if you're positioned it properly. Plus there's no energy management for Emilie, so overall it's... The next team I tried was the Emilie with the Farina Bennett Xiangling core, and it was pretty good. I expected it would be quite a lot better if you have Emilie's signature weapon. I personally used Jadewing Spear for most of my testing. I realize not everyone has Jadewing Spear, but maybe you have Deathmatch, maybe you have to use Fav, but you might have lost to a Jadewing Spear at some point, or you might have any other 5-star weapon. I thought this team was good, but it's not anything crazy. It's not the best Farina Bennett Xiangling version out there, but like I said, her weapon is actually massive for her personal damage, so if you do end up going for her weapon, this team will be a lot better. I also tried Overload with an Electro attacker, be it Sino or be it Clorand. This team kind of felt in between a C6 Chevreuse and a C0 Chevreuse. Stronger than a C0, but not as strong as C6, so definitely wouldn't recommend pulling Emilie for your Clorand or Sino or Electro carry. But again, if you happen to get Emilie and you don't happen to have any Chevreuse, then this is definitely something you can do. The reason why this team works is you still get burning as well as getting aggravate. Between Thoma applying Pyro, Emilie applying Dendro, you're going to get burning here and there, and you're also going to have a decent enough amount of Dendro to get some aggravates. But unfortunately, without any really strong buffing for Clorand, it makes the team weaker. If only Emilie was a Pyro character, you could replace Clorand for Thoma, and this team would just be wildly strong. It would just be crazy, but unfortunately she's a Dendro character, which obviously makes sense given what she does. But yeah, if only she was a Pyro character, this team would be cracked. The next team was Burn Vape Novelette. So you're going to create a burning from Xiangling and Emilie, and Novelette's going to vape. You can already vape with Novelette and swap Emilie for Kazuha and just vape just off of Xiangling. For me, for comfort wise, this is an upgrade for Novelette's Burn Vape teams overall. I personally am not able to play unshielded versions of the Burn Vape setup because my Novelette's C0, and it's very cringe to play Novelette without a shielder, in my opinion. But this team just basically loses out to the Farina Kazuha version in pretty much every metric. It doesn't have grouping being the main one, and just Farina adds a lot to the team. She adds a lot of damage, she adds a lot of buffing to Novelette, and this team is not giving very much buffs to Novelette. So overall it's good, but it's definitely not like a ceiling team of his, in my opinion. Maybe if you're somehow able to play it with replacing Zhongli for Kazuha, but this seems very impractical. The other issue I've had is sometimes getting the swirl can be difficult because you'll start a new rotation, not have enough hydro, and Emilie will be applying Dendro, eating up your hydro, so it can be hard to get a swirl with a team like this, or even the last one. Generally, it's fixable, it's fine, but just something to be aware of. The next team is Melt. You're replacing basically Farina for Emilie, so either for Ganyu on the Bennett Xiangling Farina core, or the more popular Wriothesley variant. And for me, this was by far the most disappointing part of Emilie, in that I found Emilie basically just a very strict and strong downgrade to Farina. I would have loved to see maybe Emilie buff reactions that happen with burning or something like that, like Emilie buffs vapes that have to do with burning, or Emilie buffs melts that have to do with burning. I think that would have been a really good addition to her kit, because this team with Emilie unfortunately felt quite underwhelming to me. It was still fine, it was still good, but compared to the Farina one, it was noticeably worse, much more clunky, and you're not even getting rid of Xiangling on this team. Like, ideally we'd be getting rid of Xiangling, not getting rid of Farina, to have a better team here. So the only good thing about this is it frees up your Farina for the other side, but I don't know. I'm unfortunately not a fan. Melt was the one thing that I really wanted Emilie to do, and she doesn't make it really work to me. The next team I tried was Burgeon, and this team could not survive without a healer. Burgeon's doing damage to your poor little Nahida, so I tried switching out Nahida for Baiju, but the damage is just too bad, and overall I just didn't find it very good. I also tried her with Nilou, and it was fine, but I didn't really like it over Kale at all. Pretty on the same level as Dendro Traveler, and Kale is just better. You know, you get a Kale for free, you give her Sack Bow, and Kale is just better. So overall, the current state of Emilie is pretty boring. Like, she's a good alternative to Xiangling on mono pyro teams. She can work with this team, and otherwise she's sort of a noticeable downgrade on all the other teams. I don't know if, like, am I missing something? Did I test wrong? This is just my finding. And by the way, I'm not an Emilie hater. I was really excited for her. I really love her design, like, honestly, and I really love the burning reaction, and I really wanted to see her open up some cool new stuff for burning. But right now, the stuff that she does is either like the most basic team ever, or like a solid option for an already good team in mono pyro. Perhaps if you have her 5-star weapon, which I did get, I just don't have the resources to raise, she will feel a noticeable amount stronger. On paper, she definitely is much stronger with her 5-star weapon. So I'll definitely try that out and see if that, you know, makes a big difference for me. But I know a lot of people just get their characters at C0 and don't get their 5-star weapons, and or get very few 5-star weapons. So yeah, overall, I think Emilie is fine, but she's nothing special. They really toned the off-field DPS characters down in Fontaine, it seems, aside from Furina, when Furina is so overtuned, and Chiori and Emilie both feel, like, to be honest, both feel around the same level. Like, if I were to put Emilie on the tier list, it would definitely be basically right beside Chiori, a bit above, because, like, her teams are stronger. So, but I definitely wouldn't put her in tier 1. I'd definitely put her in tier 1.5, probably at the top of tier 1.5. Maybe she goes in the bottom of tier 1, but I don't, to be honest, I don't think so. I think she's just a fine option. And I do think, like, I think that the Genshin is just cooking future potential for Emilie, but I can't recommend pulling on future potential, because what if we don't see it? What if we don't see future potential with Emilie? Like, I'm sure we will. Everything makes sense. It all stacks up for her to be there, but I just wish there was a bit more unique punch to her kit. But I still like that she is an alternative to Xiangling for some teams. And unlike, you know, C6 Chevreuse, you can actually get her for your Arlecchino team. So if you really want to replace Xiangling, you know, Emilie is an upgrade. It's just, you get Xiangling for free, and she's on so many banners, and she's in the Star Glitter shop, and she's in the Leeway thing. So it's like, yeah, I know we all want to replace Xiangling, but do you really want to replace her with a limited 5-star that's a slight upgrade in single target, a slight downgrade in AoE, and an overall quality of life upgrade that she'll probably get better in the future, but right now that's just what she is? I don't know if that's really worth it. I did want to make a little teammates tier list for Emilie, just to give you an idea of, if you have a certain character, is Emilie a really good choice for you? I'm going to put Arlecchino in part of a top team. So I did a bit more testing since the previous team section, and it's kind of interesting because although I really like the mono pyro team, I'm not sure if it's her best AoE team, because on one hand, you get to drop Xiangling, which is really good for her rotations, but Xiangling also does a lot of AoE damage, and she does some buffing and debuffing, and Arlecchino also has other good teams like Vape. And I think I kind of undersold it versus Chevreuse. I do actually like it quite a bit better than Chevreuse for Arlecchino specifically, because for single target you always have Vape, whereas this is more of an AoE option. But I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a best in slot partner. I think to really tell if it's going to be like a top meta Arlecchino team, I think we're going to have to wait to see what we get for the Pyro Archon. But if you find yourself playing, I guess I'll say this, if you find yourself playing a lot of Arlecchino mono pyro, Klee mono pyro, I'm not going to say yoimiya because she doesn't really want mono pyro because she's single target, or Lainey mono pyro, if that's kind of your go-to team, then you could definitely consider Emilie, because if you don't like playing with Xiangling so much, it could definitely feel like quite a good upgrade for you, because yeah, Xiangling is kind of really annoying to play. Her cooldowns are very long. She needs a ton of ER. Emilie fits on these teams a lot better. The downside is that she is part of your flex slot, so that slot is often, sometimes it's even Furina. Sometimes it's Zhongli, sometimes it's a defensive unit. So even for mono pyro enjoyers, a lot of people just end up playing Zhongli in that last slot. And although it's a DPS slot, that's what they're playing. And Emilie doesn't give you additional survivability overall. So I'm definitely not going to put her in best in slot partner, but the teams are definitely really good. For Novelette, I'm not really sure. At C1, sure, you could definitely say part of a top team. At C0, I'm just going to say a good team, because when you have to run Zhongli, it kind of reduces your options that you have. You can't have both Kazuha and Zhongli on the team, and you need both those to really pop off, and then you're not running Emilie. So for Z0 Novelette havers, I don't recommend Emilie. For C1, you could go for it's much more worth it to go for if you do have or plan on getting Zhongli C1. For Melt, part of a good team, not really the biggest fan of Emilie Melt, and that's definitely one of the biggest disappointments for me. And then just as like a general flex slot, she's fine. She's totally fine. But unfortunately, the damage just isn't really there. Decent even seems like a little bit too much. I think for Chlorand, it's like maybe decent, but for Sino, it's just okay. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend pulling for that team. I tried to do some Navia stuff by using her as an off-field for that, but having to switch on so often, it just wasn't, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze with something like that. And I'll put Toma here for Burgeon. I mean, it's okay. It's definitely not an upgrade for Burgeon. And I think that is all for the team's tier list. In general, she's not a must pull for anyone right now, but if you play, you know, if you main one of these characters, especially if you main one of these characters, then she could be an upgrade for one of your teams. For build guide, level 90, I mean, eventually, because she is a DPS, so level 90 does give her more base attack, more damage, and she is perfectly 100% scaling off of damage, no buffs in her kit, so so she does gain, you know, relative to her kit, she gains value from level 90, but unlike HP scalers and unlike reaction based characters, she doesn't gain as much as a lot of Dendro characters. For example, she's the last Dendro character you'll be leveling up, since she doesn't scale with elemental mastery or aggravate or anything like that. It's just raw attack, so it's a bit of a lower value to level up than some characters, but still eventually. For talents, you want to level up her skill and her burst. Her skill obviously being the higher priority. I crowned her because, again, I really like Emilie. I know probably a lot of you think I'm biased against Emilie, but I actually really like her design. This is one of my favorite colors that she's wearing. I really like her aesthetic, her design. She's both like kind of cool and also kind of sexy, and she's just cool. So I crowned her because you do get a lot of value from crowning that skill. I have her burst at 8 just because I'll take it to 9 eventually. That's where I'd recommend for most people is go 9-8 for skill and burst if you're trying to save resources, and if you want to max her out, go 10-9, and then you leave her normal attack at 1. You can, if you have C6 Bennett and you're playing her in the Bennett Farina Shangling team, you can actually level it up and do some normal attack damage, like at least Farina's buffing your pyro damage bonus. So, you know, that's something you could consider, but it's definitely not a priority. For weapons, her best in slot is her signature, and I unfortunately wasn't able to test with it because, again, I don't have the resources, but it is by far her best in slot. I think it's the biggest increase for any character signature weapon in the game overall. So if you really love Emilie, and this is honestly the banner to go for her signature, because it's on a banner with Aqua Simulacra, so now is a really good time. But if you don't have it, hopefully you have, you know, the Calamity Queller is obviously fine. Mr. Second best in slot since it can stack off field for her. Engulfing Lightning, if you need the R, is actually pretty good. Homa is pretty good. Deathmatch is quite good. That's definitely best in slot for Drip. Holy, look at that. It looks kind of better than her signature, no cap. I might have reconsidered pulling her signature if I looked at how good this looks on her. It basically looks like a signature weapon, but that's okay. Arlecchino's weapon is a stat stick, but hopefully you have Arlecchino and you're using it on Arlecchino, not on her. And her best 4-star weapon is Deathmatch. And if you don't buy the Battle Pass, then your free-to-play option is Favonius Lance, which is good if you need the ER, but not every team really wants the ER, so it can be kind of a waste. Overall, she's a bit unfree-to-play friendly for weapons, unless you happen to get the Jade Spear, which I know a lot of people do get the Jade Spear eventually from the standard banner. Hopefully one day we get them either in the shop or the standard banner selector or something like that. So hopefully that happens one day. And then her best in slot artifact set is obviously the Unfinished Reverie. And something I will note is she can enable other characters on the team to use the Unfinished Reverie. And if they're like characters like Klee or Yoimiya or Linny, they can actually use this set on the Monopyro team, and it will actually be a noticeable upgrade to them. I only have one set of Unfinished Reverie, so I was not able to test this, but it can be a pretty nice buff to characters that don't have a good artifact set. Obviously, characters like Arlecchino, this won't be a big upgrade for, but so technically she's actually a bigger upgrade to Linny and Klee Monopyro teams than she is for Arlecchino, because they'll be able to use this artifact set. That does require you to farm a brand new artifact domain for 2 characters. So on one hand, I mean, it's kind of efficient. If you didn't have an artifact set for Linny or Klee, that's kind of cool, I guess, but on the other hand, it's like, that's a lot to ask to get 2 good DPS artifact sets, especially since they both most likely want the exact same stats. They want lots of crit, lots of attack, etc. So this is her best, and if you don't have this, you're basically going for two-piece. If you're going on a Farina team, it's Marie-Chasez Hunter is pretty good. She doesn't use EM, so you don't want to use Gilded Dreams, you don't want to use anything like that. Despite being a Dendro character, she just uses attack. So if you're using her on like Nilou team, for example, you're wanting two-piece attack, or two-piece, or you know, two-piece Deepwood, two-piece attack is probably a little bit better. For artifact stats, it's really interesting. You generally want to go attack Dendro crit, but you can also go ER Dendro crit, depending on how important her burst is. And the amount of importance her burst has almost kind of depends on the enemies you're facing, because if you're in AoE, being able to use her burst is going to do a lot, because her burst is so, her skill is so single target that sometimes you're not proccing the burning aura on all the teammates, on all the enemies, so it's actually very important to have the burst up, at least to get the burning going on each character in AoE, and it's just generally a very big increase in damage. So it's kind of like if you're in AoE, you want to burst every rotation, and if you're in single target, you can't ignore her. You don't want to ignore her burst, like you use it whenever it's available, but you don't need to build energy for it. This gives very weird energy recharge recommendations. So if you have her signature, that really helps, because it gives her ER on the passive. But otherwise, you know, you might need as little as 0 ER if you're bursting every other rotation, you're in single target, but you may want to go to up to 160, 180 ER. Generally, you need less ER in AoE scenarios, so it kind of fixes itself a little bit in that way, because if you're killing enemies in AoE, you're generally catching more energy. Also, if you're using her on field, you need a lot less energy. So if you're using her like on field in the Bennett team, because she can stand in Bennett's circle and get the Bennett buff. So overall, you kind of have to play around with it and experiment for yourself. You know, does the burst, you know, can you actually get enough energy to burst off cooldown in AoE? I was using just 110 energy recharge, and generally for a lot of teams, I was able to burst every rotation when I was playing in AoE, because you just get so much more energy when you're in AoE. But there were definitely some teams where I couldn't burst every rotation, and you can also just burst off cooldown if you're on a more flexible team, since her burst cooldown is only 13.5 seconds. So if you're using her on field, you're going to be using her burst a lot more often, and that'll obviously also make it more worth it to level her burst. So these are all some things to think about. It's going to take a lot more testing in different abysses with different teams to figure out exactly when you're going to use what. So let me know what you find works best for you, and like by the next Emilie guide, I'll have more definitive recommendations for, you know, how much ER you need and exactly how important her burst is to her kit, because it's just something that's going to take a while and many abyss cycles to really figure out how important that is. It just depends on the team and depends on the enemies quite a bit. This is my build, by the way. It's actually a pretty decent build. Like, we've got a crazy amount of crit rate on this one to fix my crit ratio, a really good sands, honestly, quite a good goblet with the ER in there. Kind of mid circlet because it gives me the crit damage but not really any crit rate, a little bit of attack, and then the flower is quite good. So overall our stats are looking like this, with our artifact stats like this. So overall this is right around where my kind of stopping point for a DPS type character is. Should you pull for Emilie if you have the primos and you're going for Keqing? Probably yes, although again, he's still in beta. We technically don't even know everything he does, but that's just the rumors. If you're not planning to pull for Keqing and you don't care for Emilie, like obviously if you love her design, you got to get her. Obviously she looks amazing, her design are amazing. I love her burst animation, it looks absolutely beautiful. Her burst is worth using, so you'll see it. Like, beautiful design. I would be very tempted to go for her, but unfortunately she just doesn't add anything to the melt teams. She doesn't add anything to Nilou teams. She doesn't add anything to the Lakelight teams. It's just a relatively small upgrade for a mono pyro team. It is my favorite version of mono pyro. Whether or not that's worth it is a totally different question, right? That's a lot of primos for an upgrade, but not necessarily a massive upgrade. So if you're strapped for resources and you're not going for Keqing, then no, you shouldn't pull for her. But character, especially a character that, you know, I'm the underrated guy, right? I set a character right before Natlan. I want to tell you to pull that Emilie's actually underrated and that she's actually super good because I like her and I like her design. You know, one of the higher tier characters out of Fontaine for me in terms of design. I just love this color scheme. It just looks fantastic, but she's just solid. She's nothing special. So let me know your thoughts. Take care. Bye for now.